me, Penny has diverse research interests, including digital humanities, oral histories research, and a long-term commitment to cross-sector working. She has also worked extensively in a specialist capacity in developer-funded archaeology in Ireland, and is in an excellent position to tell us about the important role of INSTAR in enabling cross-sector research in Ireland. So,
thank you. Shall I? What do I do?
That's right. Just close this one and then break into there we go. It's on there and it's on there. Yes.
Lovely. Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me to talk here. So I'm going to talk about INSTAR, which is, well, in my opinion anyway, transforming environmental archaeology in work in Ireland. Just to give you an outline of what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to explain what is INSTAR, outline some environmental archaeology projects that are, and the outputs of them that are the result of early phases of INSTAR. I'll talk about a current INSTAR Plus project that is relevant to environmental archaeology, and we'll look at historic projects really with reference to outputs. So when I was thinking of putting this together, I was thinking about just what might be interesting for you is the way that funding is structured and how that impacts upon outputs. So that's kind of what I want to outline and what we've learned, I suppose, through the various iterations of INSTAR in Ireland. So my background, why is it me who's talking about this here? So as you were told just now, I have worked in development-led archaeology, but I'm also currently working in the School of Archaeology in UCD, and I'm working on an INSTAR Plus project, just kind of started a few months ago. And so I'll be looking at this with a view of INSTAR from both sides, I suppose. A lot of the issues, I suppose, that I'm going to be talking about are ones that I've gone over with the PI of the project that I'm working on at the moment, who's Marion McClatchy, and I know an awful lot of you here have already told me that you know Marion, so that's nice. And I've also used then INSTAR results in my consultancy work and in my research work. What is INSTAR? It stands for Irish National Strategic Archaeological Research Programme, so it's not specifically for environmental archaeology. It's a general pot of funding for knowledge gaps within Irish archaeology, and the aim initially was to address those key knowledge gaps and to help address the issue of unpublished excavation. So we've talked a lot about grey literature and using grey literature, an awful lot of stuff in Ireland when INSTAR was introduced. Things had just gone to grey literature, they hadn't been brought any further, so they're trying to bring stuff up into the published sphere so that more people can get their hands on the material, I suppose. And that was like that issue was particularly acute in 2008 because there'd been such a boom in excavation kind of the 10 years prior to that, which 2008 was the first year that INSTAR began. And so all of that was in grey literature. How do we bring that into research narratives? It was just kind of sitting there and not being used, and that was what INSTAR initially was supposed to address. And then I'm going to talk about specifically environmental archaeology projects in INSTAR, so not the other INSTAR projects. So the first one I'll talk about is, I'm kind of doing these in chronological order in terms of when they got funding. Cultivating Societies, which was funded from 2008 to 2010. EMAP2, which got some funding in 2011, or 2010, 2011, can't remember exactly which actually. And then Seeing Beyond the Site, which got funding from 2015. And then the one that I'm working on at the moment is FoodSec, which is just, the last 6 months the funding began for FoodSec. And as I say, the way projects have been funded and managed has had an impact on the outputs, so I'm going to kind of give a brief outline of the projects and then look at the outputs and see what we've learned from that. So Cultivating Societies examined the evidence for cereal cultivation in Ireland in the period, I'm going to try and avoid the cultural historic terms, so I'm going to say the period from around 4000 to 2500 BC, and you'll probably tell me I'm wrong, but you can correct me later. So the aim of the project was to investigate timing, nature and effects of the introduction of agriculture, and specifically it was kind of an archaeobotanical project really, and then There was a programme of radiocarbon dating as well, and sort of Bayesian chronologies were established for some of the material. So it was funded in 2008, 2009, 2010. And so there were 3 6-month periods of work. So it's very stop-start in terms of the funding that was provided for it. So like you'd get your pot of money, you'd do the work for 6 months, and then you'd kind of go and you'd apply for the next year. Do you know what I mean? So that's hard. That's quite hard to get continuity sometimes if people, if your staff aren't available, the people who've been doing all your research work aren't available again. So it's a new application each year. I think they coped really well with that kind of environment, because this is the kind of quick outline of some of the publications, the outputs from it to date. So 10 publications to date. This is a lot of it is Muriel McCarthy's work. There you can see, sorry, from the little graph that I've done, which is down really low, that the initial publications were kind of popular publications, popular articles in things like Archaeology Ireland, which is a popular magazine that a lot of archaeologists read, but it's supposed to be, readable for the general public as well. So those the kind of, when the project was being funded, those are the kind of articles that were coming out. And then there's a gap because people were writing up, but that writing up time wasn't necessarily funded. So there's kind of a bit of a gap. And also I think they got stuff into journals, but there's quite like some of the journals are antiquity that they were published in, there's quite a lag, a waiting period before you get stuff published, or before it comes out with antiquity, because they have just so many big contributions to that journal. So there's that lag. And then 2014 there were 2 peer-reviewed articles, 2016 again, and then like the research that came out of cultivating societies, like Muriel is still, up till very recently, still incorporating that into her research and using it with other people. And still there's like 2020, which is very recent. Still, she has journal or articles coming out based on that research. There was also an online database associated with this project, but like so many digital projects like this, it's now defunct. However, the data, a lot of it, as far as I know, has been incorporated into the Rewilding data set, which is available through the UCL Discovery repository. So it's not that it's gone, it's still available, you can still download a lot of that data. And as I say, the data continues to be incorporated into new research. There was also quite interesting practical outcomes from this project. So it basically, the review of the grey literature and the kind of the archaeobotanical reports that were incorporated into Cultivating Society's data set. What they found, that acted as our quality assurance review, I suppose, of the kind of material that was being incorporated in terms of the archaeobotanical reports that were being incorporated into site reports, as appendices and site reports and so on. So what they found was that sometimes people only included assessments, or that there were no taxa lists, and basically some people were doing full analysis, some people weren't doing full analysis. So that meant from the archaeological company's point of view, the basis for tendering was uneven, because some archaeological companies weren't planning to when they put in their tenders, they weren't planning to do full analysis, whereas others were. And from the client's perspective, they weren't necessarily getting everything that they were paying for. So in 2015, Muriel McCollum, Ellen O'Carroll and Eileen Riley put together this sort of set of guidelines for the National Roads Authority, which is now being incorporated into the Transport Infrastructure Ireland. And this is a set of guidelines for basically plant macro work from wood, charcoal, insects and pollen associated with archaeological excavations, so basically every company that takes on work on an NRA TII site has to adhere to these guidelines. And so that makes it, it's a bit more kind of, everybody's on a level playing field, I suppose. The trouble with this is that there are lots of other excavations that go on that don't come under the auspices of the TII. So members of Environmental Archaeology in Ireland, of which I'm one, we're this kind of really small kind of group of colleagues that kind of act as maybe a little bit of we're trying to campaign for better environmental archaeology in Ireland. So we encourage, when we do CPDs for people working in the field, we encourage everybody to use this. because these are kind of the set of guidelines that they're kind of a best practice set of guidelines. At the moment they're actually being updated. So because 2015, time has gone so fast, everything needs to be updated, and we're hoping to include other things as well beyond just plant macro, which are blah blah blah, etc. So in 2010, which was the last year that Cultivating Societies was funded, Barry Cunliffe did a review of INSTAR and the outcomes from all the projects that were funded by INSTAR. So he judged it to be a spectacular success. That was his quote. And he said, particularly in bringing together academic, regulatory and development-led sectors, so that everybody was kind of working to a similar goal, I suppose, working to same ends. And he recommended then in this report that's available through the Heritage Council's website, he recommended that funding should be made available on a 3-year rolling basis and he wanted improved reporting and accessibility of results from that were all the research results that were the result of INSTAR. However, this happened in 2010, and that was a really tricky funding environment because some of you might remember in 2010 Ireland applied to join the Troika, which meant that so budgetary oversight basically went outside the state. So one of the people who were looking over national budgets were the International Monetary Fund, and basically things like archaeology didn't really get first look in terms of funding and things that were allowed in the budget. So it was really through basically the determination of people in the National Monument Service, which are the archaeological civil servants in Ireland, that some INSTAR funding continued in that period, even when we were under the Troika. And one of the projects that was funded in that period was EMAP2. So in this scenario, it was really projects that had been judged a success in the first round of INSTAR funding that we got a little bit more funding each time. So EMAP2 was EMAP was basically the early medieval archaeology project. It had got funding from the very first year of INSTAR. The aim was looking at all of the early medieval excavations that had come up as a result of developer-led funding. There was it was kind of transforming the way people understood archaeology of the period, and wanted to incorporate that into research narratives. And the 2011 grant covered looking at animal bone, plant remains, and it was basically archival research. There was no other material went into that. Looking at those in terms through the lens of agriculture and economy. This was the report that was the outcome of that. I think it was made online, submitted in December 2011. And it was a 3-part investigation of the evidence for agriculture in that period. So an overview based on text, textual evidence, artifacts, the type of sites that come up in the period. And then there was a section that was on the archaeobotanical results that was derived from grey literature, and similar treatment of the zooarchaeological results. The outputs from this project are kind of different to the ones from Cultivating Societies, in that report then fed into a book that was published by BAR, and there are 2 peer-reviewed journals of it. They got the turnaround time quite quick, in terms of the publishing for that. The book was published in 2014, I think, but the project was already on a roll. They had other monographs on the go and stuff, so that experience meant that they could get that good turnaround in terms of publishing their data. However, there aren't any digital data sets from that project in terms of availability. It was just the paper or the PDF. In terms of those projects, just from a perspective of somebody who worked in development-led archaeology and doing archaeobotanical reports, I've used those 2 projects quite extensively in my work. So they're really useful, I think, in particular in trying to pick out things like chronological and regional patterns. Now, the assemblage from the Irish, the data set from the Irish Neolithic, it just isn't big enough to pick up regional patterns really, but it is from the early medieval period. So that has been a really good output in terms of, because that sort of data set was never available before. the record was just too diffuse in terms of Irish archaeobotany. So that's been a really good output from that project. So the next project that was funded by INSTAR was after we were really good Europeans, and we exited the Troika in 2013. So INSTAR was again funded then in 2015, and the next environmental archaeology project that was funded under that round of funding was Seeing Beyond the Site. And it's really a case study that highlights some of the issues with the funding structure, I suppose. So funded for that 2015-2016, the aim was to contextualise the archaeology of the late Bronze Age and Iron Age within contemporary landscapes through palaeoenvironmental research and environmental archaeology. But the trouble was at the end of 2016, the funding dried up, and there's been one pollen diagram published and a couple of general articles about it, but there's still an awful lot of data to come out to be published from that. But it depends on when people have free time. It's basically depending on when people have free time to collate all that and to put it into publishable format at this stage. So because the write-up time wasn't funded, that, it's been really, it's been slow to get that out, I suppose. So in the next round of INSTAR funding, which is the current round, INSTAR Plus, so Mary McClatchy, who's the PI on our project, she was really determined that we would get the writing up into the funding structure. So INSTAR Plus is funded by the National Monument Service and the Heritage Council, which is how all of the INSTAR projects have been funded. So National Monument Service are government, and Heritage Council are a statutory body. They're a real public-facing statutory body. They fund a lot of community archaeology. They also involved in funding community involvement in natural heritage as well. The difference with INSTAR Plus is that Irish Research Council is now a strategic partnership or one of the strategic partners in administering the fund, I suppose. The core value, their focus is much more on the academic sector. Their core value is excellence in research and so on. So I think that makes quite a difference. I suppose they're more independent as well. Their review process is different because in Irish archaeology is so small, everybody knows each other. It's quite good to have that kind of intermediary, I suppose. And they're also, one of their emphasis is on maximum sharing of the outputs. So if you don't put a good plan in terms of your sharing, you probably won't get funding. So that's kind of good. The themes for the current round of funding is part of the Coalesce programme. So it's collaborative alliances for social challenges, for societal challenges, So there's very much a focus on what you can do for the current day, as well as what you just want to know in terms of an archaeologist. So if you think about that theme, archaeology and contemporary society, the project that I'm working on now, food sec, so food security in the period from 2500 to about 500 BC. So we're investigating things like food security and food storage, and those are challenges that we see in the news today, but we also, they go back obviously thousands of years. And can archaeology play a role in developing sustainable agricultural food procurement strategies today? That's a question to ask. And the methods we're using include collating evidence for animal and plant remains, evidence for food storage, and the aim is to make that available as an open access data set on completion and probably published, not 100% sure yet, but probably published through the repository in UCD. And we're also looking at traditional evidence from the folklife record in Ireland, a massive collection of folklore from Ireland, looking at that to see whether there's anything in the record for food storage in the past, in the more recent past, that we could maybe begin to identify on archaeological sites. So that's my life at the moment. They're also doing new data from experimental work to test the idea of whether pits were suitable places for food storage in Ireland. So a lot of the stuff I've read on, it's on the chalkland in Britain, or it's in places like Iberia or southern France, where you don't get an awful lot of rain, or it's a lot different where we come from. So we've got a partnership with a food scientist who's testing, he's kind of going to test whether the stuff that comes out of pits after it's been buried for a while is actually edible, or would it be dangerous to eat it, or so on. There's also a little bit of new stable isotope analysis from identifying, we're in the process of identifying assemblages that might be suitable to look at specifically from places that we think might be redistribution centres, and see how that feeds into our narratives about storage and so on. And so the most important thing from our perspective, I suppose, for today is that the project funding covers the writing and submission of 3 journal articles, and they're to be produced within the project life cycle. So by this time next year, I will be writing. And I suppose the question is this moving environmental archaeology in Ireland forward? So, as I said, Mary McClatchy, who's the food sec PI, she worked on the early INSTAR projects and has used that experience to put together work packages with clearly defined outputs that hopefully, will all fall within the time frame, I suppose, of the project, so that we can, once the funding has dried up, hopefully we won't be doing it in our spare time. And then through open access data publishing, hopefully FoodSec will augment the plant and animal data sets available from that period in Ireland, converting the data from Greylit into more usable formats. And the main advantage should be quicker production of outputs. That's fingers crossed, anyway. Just a quick mention, this is a project that I don't really know much about, but it's funded under the same funding structure, and it's also an environmental archaeology project that's just started quite recently. Some of you might be interested. It's called New Pastures. They're looking at zooarchaeological remains, isotope analysis, Bayesian modelling, and some work on avian as well, I suppose. For the sheep, goat, cattle, horse, etc. in the Irish Iron Age. Thank you.